Good morning. Good morning. I'm Safwan Masri. I'm Dean of Georgetown University in Qatar. And it's really my great privilege to welcome you to the second day of the Georgetown Global Dialogues. Yesterday was very rich with wonderful conversations, which we will resume today as we reflect on our ability to understand one another across the deep fractures of our world. My sincere thanks to Tom Banshoff, Pankaj Mishra, and our colleagues at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs for convening this extraordinary dialogue. Across today's sessions, we will explore how stories cross linguistic, cultural, and economic boundaries. Of all the forces shaping the global circulation of literature, I want to focus in my remarks this morning on one that comes closest to the ideal of fraternity: translation. Translation carries the promise of reciprocity and cultural exchange, offering writers and readers alike the joy of shared discovery. In that sense, it reflects much of what this gathering hopes to explore. And yet, for all its symbolic weight, translation also reveals the asymmetries that persist beneath the surface. In my experience, few things lay bare the politics of storytelling more starkly. Translation is often celebrated as a hopeful metaphor, a bridge between cultures. But real bridges imply free movement in both directions. More often, what we encounter are toll roads, selective, regulated pathways that permit only certain stories to pass. These routes determine whose grief travels, whose ideas circulate, and whose metaphors endure. Consider Palestinian storytelling. Too often, translation involves both linguistic shifts and the imposition of ideological frameworks. The stories that reach global audiences are those that foreground loss, dispossession, trauma. And while these are truths that must be told, they are not the whole truth. Stories charged with vitality, humor, complexity, resistance, stories that reject the script of victimhood are often passed over or repackaged. In this way, voices from the global south pay a toll for passage, permitted to travel only when molded into what the global north wants or tolerates to hear. As Kamila Shamsi noted yesterday in the conversation she was part of with Nisreen and Juan Gabriel, the North is not really interested in stories that sound like novels that reflect the political culture of where you come from. Word literature has long been imagined as a gift, south to north, margin to center, suffering in exchange for visibility. But what we call access is often assimilation. Translation, as Indian scholar Tejaswini Niranjana warns, produces strategies of containment. This dynamic plays out in a publishing world ruled by editors, curators, and prize committees united less by proximity to the work than by detachment from it. Fraternity must aspire to more. It should incentivize complexity in all its forms and reject its corollary, the nefarious self orientalization that occurs when writers control their work to meet an imagined, approving gaze. At Georgetown University in Qatar, we stand at this intersection of civilizational memory and future possibility. Every day, our faculty and students from the global south engage with layered literary traditions: Arabic, Persian, African, South Asian, and with vibrant spiritual inheritances that inform how meaning is made. The result is a reorientation of global discourse. Knowledge flows not from margin to center or vice versa, but across, between, and within. From this vantage point, GUQ is honored to be a supporting partner of these essential global dialogues, which inclusively pair critical thought with moral imagination. And we look forward to hosting the dialogues in Doha next spring. Today's conversations ask difficult questions. How does storytelling navigate transcendence in an age skeptical of belief? How can writers articulate realities carefully enough to evade dismissal, yet powerfully enough to resonate? And how might literature respond to the contradictions of our technological era, where social networks promise connection but deliver distance, and where genuine encounter grows ever more rare? The late Pope Francis, in Fratelli Tutti, offers a way forward, embracing our shared vulnerability as a source of grace and genuine connection, a call that recasts what we ask of literature and what literature asks of us. Engaging with these questions sincerely today means recognizing literature not merely as product or platform, but as an ongoing, imperfect, profoundly human dialogue. Such a dialogue demands humility over certainty, openness over control, and the courage to reimagine the very terms of our conversation. That is our challenge and our opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Safwan. And again, thanks to everyone really who's made this event possible. This event really was born out of the conviction that the present moment demands a reconsideration of all that we do as writers and thinkers. Not only what we are doing now, but what we have done in the past, and what we may do in the future. Because the old ways of doing things no longer seem adequate. And, perhaps the idea was we can come together to talk about the ways in which we can move forward. So I was very struck by some of the things said yesterday. Many speakers not only articulated a sense of crisis, they also spoke about re-enchantment. And there were some remarkable tributes paid to Pope Francis by people who are, if they are Christian, they're nominally Christian, and many of them who paid these tributes are not Christian, or certainly not born Christian. And these tributes opened up a question, what are the resources available to us in this moment of crisis? What shape can these resources take? And it's increasingly clear that we cannot rely upon the two main contrarian ideas of the modern world, the two ideas that promised us some kind of release from a complacent, self-satisfied, bourgeois civilization. And those ideas were Marxism and Nietzscheanism. In different ways, both of these ideas believed in the possibility of unlimited self-creation, in endless power, mastery over the earth, over the natural environment. Of course, the political and environmental fate of Marxism has been well known for some time, especially in communist countries. Today, we see Nietzscheanism in its most degraded form in the naked will to power exercised by men like Narendra Modi or Donald Trump, Elon Musk. The list is extremely long. So I've been thinking a lot about writers who, again, not relying on any of these received ideas, contrarian ideas, how they faced a breakdown quite like the one we are confronting right now. And what was their response? It's interesting to think there were conferences, acts of solidarity, attempts to build a community back in the 1930s, of the kind that we are attempting here in Rome. There was a big it was called the Second International Congress of Anti-Fascist Writers in Valencia in 1937, where writers such as Octavio Paz, Andre Malraux, Neruda, Antonio Machado, various others gathered. But there was another attempt to expand the range of reference, to develop new affinities, new sympathies. Yesterday I mentioned some of the people who sought a kind of redemptive wisdom in non-Western arts, philosophies, religions, whether it's Yeats or André Breton, Naomi mentioned, so many others. But there were also others who looked again at their inherited cultures. I will only mention one and quote from him. And he was born a Catholic in Poland. And I mention him since we are in Rome, the place where a great, lofty empire was finally unmade by a teaching that emphasized ordinary, elementary virtue. And this writer is Witold Gombrowicz, who was away from Poland when Hitler invaded the country. And then he had to exile himself to Argentina. He didn't speak Spanish in the beginning. He had to teach himself Spanish. I've been fascinated with him for a very long time. A man of remorseless intelligence. I just never encountered such a profoundly skeptical temperament. By no means a devout person. Yet this is what he wrote while living in exile in Argentina. Literature does not have a hard time coming to an understanding with a profound and tragic Catholicism because it contains an emotional content which is growing in us too when we look at the frenzy of the world. Today, when I look at a Catholic, it is as if I were looking at myself. I see the changes in this mirror which have taken place in me under the severe historical events of recent years. Today, do I ask that humanity be progressive, that it fight superstition, bear aloft the standard of the Enlightenment and culture, and care about the development of art and science? Surely. But I would first prefer that the other man not bite me, spit on me, or torture me to death. The intellectual crisis that we are experiencing is not caused so much by our doubting the power of reason, as much as by the fact that the range of reason is so limited. Finally, one last quote that I'll end with. We discover that the number of people is far more significant than the quality of the truth. That is why we have such a violent need of a basic and simple language, so that it could be the place where the philosopher comes together with the illiterate. Thank you, and please welcome the next panel.